Okay, Be'ezrat Hashem. So now we start Perek Revi'i, which will discuss the Refu'ot Cholei HaNefesh, and we will understand what that really means. Okay. Ha'ma'asim ha'tovim ha'ma'asim ha'shavim. So here the Rambam comes with this fundamental definition of what it means to be healthy, right? And to do good actions. A good action is an action that is balanced. Okay? That is the reaction when you do something, if you don't do too much of it or too little of it, and it's balanced and evaluated, it's called ma'aseh tov. It's called ma'aseh tov. Right? You don't do too much of it, or you don't do too little of it, because both extremes are bad. And obviously, when it's an impulsive action, if it's too impulsive or not enough impulsive, also it's bad. So we're talking about an instinctive action that is, or instinctive action, or an action,
a reaction,
or a reaction.
Right.
But now we're focusing on the actual action, not on the midah. Okay.
Okay.
The ma'aseh, right? The action is when it's balanced and there's equilibrium in it, it's good. If you do too much exercise or too little exercise, it's not good. You have to do balance. If you eat too much of something, or you don't eat at all, or you eat too little of it, it's also not good, right? The actual action. And what are the extremes? One that is too much and one is too little. Okay. Now that's actions. The ma'alot and the traits and techunot nafshiot v'kinyanim memutzaim ben shte techunot ra'ot ha'achat me'en yetera ve'achat chasera. ומן התכונות האלה התחייבו הפעולות ההם. So here the Rambam says two things. He says the good deeds, the ma'alot, right? The good deeds, the good traits of a person are the values, the traits that are all embedded inside the person from and the person was born from it. That's the tchunot al-nafshiyot. V'kinyanim. That's the second nature. These are the behavior, the midot, the traits a person acquired and forged and developed throughout his life due to peer pressure, social environment, education, location, parents, generation, right? Each individual, on top of what he is born with, also will develop other traits. Both of them, right? So the traits that a person is born with and the traits a person acquires through it because of his surrounding and upbringing, both of them are good when they also are balanced. And the extremes, one, if you have a midah that is too intense, or a midah that is too little, if you're too sensitive of something, or too insensitive, or too intense of something, or not intense enough of something, both of them, both extremes are bad. So the good midah is the midah that is balanced. It's the emotional, instinctive awakening that sits and in the middle of those two extremes, and basically is what is balance again. And he says, and those techunot, those traits, are what guide and controls and direct the action, right? This is the fuel that will push a person to do an action. So here he says how the instinct and the action together are called the reaction, right? Mm-hmm. The instinct, the emotion awakes itself and pushes a person to do a certain action. Right?
I have a question. So everyone's born with different traits? Born with, not acquired, born with.
Okay. Yeah. And then you acquire along your life based on your experience, etc., other traits. Okay? Now, what's important also to understand is that here the Rambam basically tells us that you need to have a balance, right? Which means there is an evaluation process that a person needs to do constantly of his actions and of his emotions in order to determine if he is balanced and good or not, if he is closer to one extreme or the other, right? So the underlying message the Rambam sets at this point is that a person needs to evaluate constantly a behavior and an action in order to determine whether he's healthy or not.
It's a daily inventory, we call it.
Huh? Yeah,
A daily inventory.
that's right. That's right.
The 11th step.
And now he's going to go into details of different types of midot. And he's going to give a few examples. Zehirut, to be careful. So the Zehirut sits in between שהיא מידה ממוצעת בין רוב התאווה ובין היעדר ההרגש ההנאה. To be zahir, to be careful, is a control that a person has when, that sits, to be careful, sits between having too much desires or not enough. Very interesting, right? That's called zehirut.
What do you mean, not enough desires?
If the ta'avot, so some
Right.
people don't have their build up or their senses do not allow them to have, or are not used properly to have the ta'ava, the desire to do certain things. So some people have very strong desires to do certain things, others very little, right? Some people desire a lot food, others not so much. Some people desire I don't know, women, others not. Some people desire money, others not really, right? So the zehirut, to be careful, what he means is to be also preshut. That's what it means, right? To be detached from the influence of the basic desires, okay? You need to be able to sit in between the two. You need to have enough desires to do what you need to do, but not too much or not too little. For example, we know what Chachamim teach us in Gemara, that Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, they did a tikkun and of Avodah Zarah, and they were able to pray and annul completely the ta'ava, the desire of Avodah Zarah. And then they took out the desire of intimacy.
And the chickens wouldn't even mate, right?
Exactly. You saw, the Gemara says that the Chachamim saw that even the chicken would not reproduce, so they brought it back, right? The Midrash tells us, Yetzer hara gadol v'yetzer hara katan nitan la'adam. There was a big Yetzer hara and a small Yetzer hara given to men in terms of ta'avot. The big one was Avodah Zarah, the small one was woman.
Wow.
HaKadosh Baruch Hu canceled, the Chachamim canceled the big one, we're left with the small. Imagine what it was to have the ta'ava of Avodah Zarah, especially when we see what this ta'ava does, the ta'ava of woman does to humanity today. So the balance, when you're in control, you need to desire, you have the desire to be with your wife, but not too much to the point where it takes away, your mind, and it makes you immoral and etc. Right? So that's called zehirut. Aval rov ta'ava, he says, if you have too much ta'avot, it's one extreme. But if you don't feel anything, you don't have any desires, you don't. It's also the opposite. the fact that you don't desire, or the fact that you desire God, both are bad. You cannot say that one is worse than the other. No, they're bad, both of them. Extremes are bad. Now, what's important to understand is that, and the Ari HaKadosh teaches us in Torah HaNefesh, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the ta'avot, the desires, as it's called ta'ava kiyumit. He gave us the ta'avot, the desire, in order to survive. It's a surviving instinct, right? To reproduce, to eat, right? To be safe, to protect your body. All these are desires that were given in order to survive. Imagine we didn't have the desire to eat, we would die. If we didn't have the desire to reproduce, humanity would go through extinction, right? So it was given to us to survive. The problem is that throughout the generations, it became a point of reference and identity of a person. It was not controlled and balanced properly, and it went completely crazy, and it became a trend, a social trend. And that's what led to the door of Sodom V'Amorah, or the door of the Mabul, etc., where things were completely out of control. Why? Because of this mistake that those traits, the ta'avot, the desires, were not understood properly, were not controlled properly, and were thought to be an animalistic trait that defines human, instead of being understood and addressed as a trait, or as a trait that is kiyumi, that it's a survival instinct, not a pleasure, not an instinct. It's a survival instinct. That's regarding that. Now, he says, Tchunot HaNefesh, when we have traits, רוב הטבעה והיא התכונה יתרה והיעדר ההרגשה והיא התכונה החסרה, שתיהם יחד פחיתויות מפחיתויות המידות. If the instinct of a person is too much or too little, then that makes a person sick with the zehirut. The person is sick with the ta'avot. He's sick with the desire of food. He's sick with the desire of a woman. That doesn't make it. You can be sick with the desire of a woman and not be sick with the desire of food. You can be sick with the desire of money and not be sick with the other two, right?
Each trait is different, right?
But here the ta'ava, yes, the ta'ava and what it's applied on will determine the health.
The remedy.
First of all, before the remedy, the health status of the person with that specific desire.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting that the first example the Rambam brings is the instinct of survival that completely distorted itself throughout generation to become such a moral chaos in society.
Right.
And then he brings other examples. Nedivut, to be charitable. Memutza ben akilut ben apizu. It's between the person that doesn't give anything, doesn't want anything, doesn't let go of anything, and pizu, the person that just
gives away.
Huh?
Just gives away.
Gives away, sprays away without any calculation, without any understanding, without any motives, without anything. Gevura, courage. Sits between a person that takes uncalculated risks and crazy risks, and somebody that's so scared and so vulnerable that it paralyzes him in his life, and he cannot make decisions. That's from the fear. Silsul. It's self-confidence. Kavod atzmi. Right? Silsul is kavod atzmi. Self-confidence. The self-confidence sits between itnaseut, between having too much ego, uben nevala, and have no ego at all, to a point where your actions you can have no problem doing actions of an animal and of disgrace and act in a very immoral way. And then he explains, "Uperush silsul, umי שמתכבד כראוי ואינו מתנבל בדבר." It's somebody that has self-respect, and he's not going to do certain things that will stain his person or his image. And that sits in between what? התנשאות, שיתכבד האדם יותר מן הראוי לו, is somebody that thinks that he deserves more kavod than he really should be getting. And nevala yedua, and what is nevala? The other extreme is a person that will do actions that are completely immoral and bad. Right? Busha. He will do things that will bring upon him shame and disgrace, and he doesn't care. So, I heard many times from Rav Moshe Shapira Tzadik Livracha. He told us about self-respect, yeah, and he said that he heard when he was young from a zaken about self-respect. He says everybody needs self-respect to exist. If you don't have self-respect, you cannot exist. And he gave this example. He said, if you take a man and you tell him, you know what, I want you to get undressed. You're going to go under the table. We're going to serve you food like a dog, and you're going to eat like a dog, and we're going to call all your friends to come and watch you. Nobody would do that. Doesn't matter, how much you give the guy. If somebody has self-respect, he will do that. Yeah? In order to exist, you need kavod, you need self-respect.
Some people would do it for a lot of money.
That's a difference. Right. But the Baal HaMaor addresses it in his Hagdama Lashas, and he talks about the self-respect that is basically the influx and the aura the neshama has, right? Or the dmut that HaKadosh Baruch Hu used to create man, that is really inside the core essence of humanity. And this is what a person needs to reflect on, needs to relate to, and appreciate. And that is the starting point of what we call existence. That's the self-respect a person must have, and for himself. Now, his behavior will dictate if he is delusional and he thinks he's the center of the world and will demand respect from that he shouldn't, he doesn't deserve from people around him, or based on his actions will show that he completely disregards and has zero value to the basic human definition, right? The definition of a human. This is why the Rambam in Sefer HaMoreh, for example, has no problem calling certain people animals. Because if you don't have the self-respect that defines you as an individual, as a human, then you're an animal. You're an animal. Another example he gives, Nahat, inner peace, right? Nahat ruach, Nahat. Sits ממוצעת בין הקטרוג והקנטרנות, ובין רכות הטבע, מה שקוראים בלעז מולדה, והוא מי שהוא בלא דיבור ובלא מעשה לכבדות טבעו וקור מזגו, והוא כנגד הקטרות, שיבוא מחידוד טבעו וחום מזגו. Says the Nahat sits between somebody that is so impulsive that he is explosive, and to everything he overreacts, and the polar opposite of somebody that's so heavy like lead, he doesn't react to anything. Doesn't matter what you do, you can poke him, the guy doesn't react. Ha'anava, humility, ממוצעת בין הגאווה ובין שפלות הרוח, right? To be anav sits between ego And on the other hand, low self-esteem. So here we see that anava is one thing, pitzul is another thing, right? Two different things. There is self-respect in order to exist and have a purpose, find a purpose in your life. And then there is humility, which is how you project yourself in life. Very different. One is how do you see yourself and how do you respect yourself? And the other one is how do you impose yourself?
Here we're talking about more how you see yourself.
The first one is how you see silsul is how you see yourself.
Right, okay.
Anava is how you impose and project yourself in society. Histabkut, satisfaction. Also, look, he says it sits between somebody that loves money and will be ready to sacrifice anything just for the money, versus someone that's lazy. So a lazy person, according to the Rambam, is somebody that doesn't have enough desire for money, and that basically will make him lazy. Make him lazy. That's so the opposite of lazy is loving money. Tuvlev, kindness, having a good heart. Memutza ben hanevala beitron tuval levav is somebody that is completely insensitive, disgusting, right? Nevala, you know what nevala is? The guy is a carcass of an animal.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. It's like you're dry and stiff like a carcass. And the opposite, beitron tuval levav, somebody that's so good that he cannot say no to anything. And here is like, there's a saying of my grandfather, you say it all the time. He used to tell me your yes is worth this unless you can say no. It's only once you can say no that by choosing your yes has a value. But if you say yes, yes, yes all the time, and you cannot say no, then your yes is not a yes. There's no value to it. ובגלל שאין למידות האלה שם ידוע בלשוננו, צריך לפרש ענייניהם ומה שרוצים בו הפילוסופים. So now he's going to talk a little bit more and define better what it means to have a tuv lev, to have a good heart. לב טוב קוראים מי שכל כוונתו להיטיב לבני אדם בגופו, עצתו וממונו, בכל יכולתו. Somebody that has a good heart, somebody that does his best, okay? Kol kavanato, all his purpose, all his desire in life is to help others with his body, in his time, his efforts, with his aitzot, with his intellect, and with his mammon and with his means. B'chol yecholto, as much as he can. So what's the limit? Until what point? Bilti sheyasigeu nezek o bizayon. Until, the limit is when it comes at a price of sacrifice of, where you lose something, you get hurt, right?
Yourself, right?
Or you get shamed. That's where the limit is. You have to be kind and giving all the way to a point where it starts, becoming a nezek or a bizayon.
So it starts to backfire.
Yeah.
Okay.
Naval, and the opposite of that, the court, the carcass. Exactly the opposite. Somebody that doesn't care about anyone and doesn't have any interest in helping anyone, even for actions that don't require from him any sacrifice or any involvement or any investment, not of time, not of money, or not of efforts. You don't lose anything. Why not? No, I don't want. but it's not costing you anything. It's nothing. You're not losing anything. No, I don't want. That's the opposite. And he goes back to the one that has too much, that is too good. ויתרון טובה לבב הוא שעושה דברים הנזכרים בלב טוב, ואפילו אם ישיגו בזה נזק גדול, ביזיון או טורח רע והפסד מרובה. He goes back to the same thing. He says, when the losses are great, when you say yes and it comes at the cost of that makes it detrimental and hurtful and painful, etc. Or you say yes and by saying yes you're hurting others around you. That's when the limit comes. You have to know to say no to certain things, to protect your beloved ones or yourself from shame or collateral damage.
Like saying no to your kids when you know it's good for them, and
that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. סבלנות, patience. ממוצע בין הכעס והיעדר הרגשת חרפה ובוז. To be sablan, to be patient, sits between anger and between insensitivity. היעדר הרגשת חרפה ובוז. When you're completely insensitive to shame and bizayon, right? This is to be sablan. If somebody is going to shame you, is going to take you down, no, there has to be a reaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to respect your essence, just to respect your person. But on the other hand, somebody that's kasan, somebody that's angry, reacts to everything again, right? Explodes to everything. No.
So you're saying if somebody shames you or embarrasses you, there has to be a reaction? Isn't it better to walk away sometimes?
That's lifnim mishurat hadin. Right now we're talking again.
Okay.
You're right. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that in a minute. But right now we're just framing each midah,
each extreme, right?
Putting it inside the bracket of the spectrum of extremes.
Okay.
Boshet panim, to be shy. Memutza ben ha'azut da'baishanut, right? If you are arrogant or you are too shy to the point where you are paralyzed and you cannot talk and you cannot express yourself and you cannot interact, that's bad, right? And here the Rambam explains a little bit more because we have a contradiction in the Torah, right? Baishan, according to the Chachamim, who etzla mi sheyesh lo rov boshet. A Baishan is someone that has too much boshet. Boshet panim hamemutza. So when we say what is the middle, is to have boshet panim. Boshet panim means it's not to be shy to the point where you are paralyzed, but to be boshet panim, not to be shy enough that you don't want to be under the spot. And he brings it to on one hand we said lo baishan lamed. If you're shy, you can never learn because you never ask the questions, so you don't have your answers. You cannot grow. And that's for the baishan, right? We don't say boshet panim. Ena boshet panim lamed. We said ena baishan lamed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you have boshet panim, this is a trait that brings you to Gan Eden. וכן שאר המידות יצטרכו על כל פנים לשמות מונחים להם מהסכמה שיהיו העניינים מובנים. It says, and the rest of the midot, it's important to identify them with names in order to be able to categorize it in a spectrum where you will see the extremes and find that midah as being the balanced midah, what the Rambam calls the Shvil HaZahav, right? The path, the golden path. Now, what's extremely interesting is that here the Rambam is introducing the refuah, right? The cure of
Right.
the nefesh, of the bad traits we all have in us. But I haven't seen until now any
Anger.
refuah.
Oh,
We didn't see any cure here. All we're seeing is a
identification.
definition. A definition. What's extremely important is to understand that the identification is part of the cure. If
Right.
you don't know how to identify your trait, you cannot cure your trait. And how can you identify your trait? Is by finding you and categorizing your behavior, number one. So that requires awareness. How do I react? Number one. And then number two, okay, I reacted in a certain way. Now I have to plug that reaction in the spectrum of where that reaction belongs, and then see how far it is from the center or how close it is to an extreme in order to identify how sick you are in that trait.
Right. How do you identify the center?
I'm sorry?
How do you identify the center?
So that's what the Rambam gave it to us. Kodat. Oh, right. And this is where the importance of the da'at kicks in. Very good. Because the da'at, if you have da'at, or more, if you have da'at Torah, right? So your intellect will dictate a proper behavior, right? So it's only if you allow your intellect to identify what is the proper behavior that you can actually compare now your instinctive behavior to your moral behavior, right?
Right.
And only then compare it and identify how healthy or how sick a person is in that specific trait. Nachon?
Yeah.
So here the Rambam comes with an amazing lesson. It's not written black and white, but it's so clear. Is that part of the healing process is to introduce the da'at and the awareness. Because that's the only way you're going to start comparing and questioning yourself. Only then you can assess whether you're healthy or you're not healthy.
Well, he's a doctor.
Yeah,
it's like going to a doctor, right? They have to identify the problem and then they can give an assessment.
Exactly. But here the Rambam is giving us the tools,
right,
to eventually become our own doctor if we have the da'at. But without that, there's nothing you can do about it.
So people can live their whole lives not even knowing where the center is, if they're too much.
We address it. You have those people that know there's something wrong, but they don't do anything about it. And then those ones that believe that what's wrong is actually right.
Right.
Right? That was in the last chapter.
Last paragraph. Yeah.
Sure. So here, it's fundamental to have the involvement of da'at in order to identify the health and the sickness, in order to plug it into the proper framework, right? The spectrum, and identify how sick or how healthy I am. That's the base. And that's what he says. Yes, if you cannot do it on your own, then you go to the Chacham, and the Chacham will be that da'at and will be that spectrum.
Right, that's why people call the rabbis for questions, for answers, and
That's right. Yeah. It's a soundboard.
Spiritual doctor. Yeah.
And here the Rambam will introduce a flaw in society when it comes to the identification of those midot. Like you said, yeah. But how do I know what's the middle and what's not?
Right.
The Rambam will address it. A lot of people, society make a lot of mistakes when it comes to identify what is the balance. Why? A lot of people or society sometimes identify an extreme as something good, as something that is balanced. Sometimes they take one extreme and they think it's balanced. For example, in society, people think that taking a lot of risks is a sign of courage.
Right.
They call, a person that will take a crazy risk. Say, look how courageous this person is. And the more risk you take, and the more courageous you are. And sometimes he puts his life in danger. And he knows that there's a big chance that he's going to die. But you know what? He gets saved by chance. The odds were against him, but he was saved. Look how courageous, how big of a gibor this person is. That's one extreme that is identified as something, right? That is gibor, which is supposed to be the definition of the middle, the balance, right? The balance trait. Sometimes it's the opposite. It's when you don't have enough of something, they're going to say, wow, it's amazing how great the person is. Look how balanced that person is, right? So we talk about the too much side of the extreme of the spectrum, and now he's going to address the too little side of the spectrum. We're going to say the person that is completely insensitive, we're going to tell him, you know what, this guy is patient. Or we're going to identify the atzlan, the lazy, as somebody that is satisfied. Somebody that doesn't have any emotions or any desires or any pleasures. He doesn't. We're going to say, wow, look at this guy, has prishut, he's parush. Yeah? Look how in control he is, that he doesn't have no ta'ava, he has no desires. He's really in control. He has yirat shamayim, this guy. He doesn't have no ta'avot. But that's because his senses are messed up. Because he's completely disconnected from the instinct that defines a human. Or if you talk about the lazy, and you say, wow, look at this guy, he's so satisfied. No, he's not satisfied. He's lazy. There's no motivation in his life. There's an optical illusion. When you see lazy people, you're like, wow, these guys are so happy, like nothing bothers them. Like they walk in the street like nothing is happening. And you may think, well, guys are amazing. It's amazing. Nothing moves the guy. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't want anything. That's not called being sameach b'chelko. That's called being lazy. You need the motivation. You need the stimulation. You need the desire. Right? The same thing, like he says, the savlan, pachut hanefesh. Right? If you're heavy and you're not reactive and you don't care for anything, and wherever he's thrown at you, you don't react. That's not called being savlan. That's not called being patient. That's called being heavy. ועל זה אמין מן הטעות יחשבו גם כן, says, and in the same spirit, people make also the mistake that the פיזור ויתרון הלב מן הפעולות הטובות. He says when you say yes to everyone, or if you're charitable, that you spray your money without counting, says, wow, look how charitable the guy is, or look how good of a heart this person is. וזה כולו טעות. This is a fundamental mistake that is forced upon humanity and generations by society. The emet is that the only thing you should praise and look forward to and respect is the balance, the control that a person has over all these minot, and how he does it in a proper way. And this is what you have to focus, and this is what you have to target. A person has an obligation, if he wants to be healthy, to always check, always
Balance.
introspect, and balance his action all the time, and that's how until he naturally becomes balanced. Here, the Rambam already, reveals to us the framework. You have to check yourself, and you have to force yourself to get towards that middle. And the more you behave like that, the more you do it, and the more your nature becomes balanced, the more you become healthy. What's beautiful also is that the Ramban and Nahmani, in his definition of Mashiach, he says, what is Mashiach? When everybody will do the right thing naturally. So what the Rambam is telling us here is that these efforts and this behavior to get to the balance of things and to get to an equilibrium is basically, according to the Ramban, right? The efforts to bring closer Mashiach.
Yeah.
You're bringing your own Mashiach. You free yourself. And when you think about it, you're really freeing yourself from polar extremes that take over your mind, that take over your life. This is freedom. This is freedom.
But we live in such society now that people, like, again, it's very, like he says, it's very easy to get fooled that, you may be living one extreme, but in society that's good,
Exactly.
It's like an illusion that, no, that's the way it's supposed to be,
Absolutely. This is why we have Chachamim, this is what we have Torah, and this is what we have Da'at Torah. We see a lot of people always go and question. Like the Gemara tells us in Masechet Yevamot, if I'm not mistaken, Dav Kuftet. The Gemara tells us there that the Sanhedrin, right, the Chachamim of the Sanhedrin had to go and ask questions. If you're in part of the Sanhedrin and you have a Rab, you have to ask your Rab before you give a Psak Din.
And they would like to tell.
Always question. Oh, yes. Maybe
so asking is good. That's I'm saying that's how you get to that area.
Question. By the way, this is, and I referred it to my show yesterday on the Leila Seder. This is the purpose of Manishtana. Why did the Chachamim use the terminology Manishtana? What changes tonight from every night? Why didn't the Chachamim say, why do we eat matzah tonight? Why do we wear tovel 2 times? Why do we drink, leaning down? That's not the questions. We say, what changes tonight from the rest of the night? The questioning is what triggers and motivates a person to change and grow in life. This is the foundation of the Avodat HaNefesh, of the healing process, is to, number one, have the da'at, okay, as a point of reference, point of origin. Then the awareness to compare the instinctive reaction to that point of origin. Identify it in a spectrum related to that trait to see how close you are to the center or how close you are to an extreme. And in order, and that's fundamentally important, like the Rambam says, like you're saying, in order to know whether your da'at is really aligned with the proper da'at fundamentally, is to question yourself. Okay, is my middle ground the Torah sees or not? This is called Da'at Torah. Through learning the Torah, through learning Chachamim, Divrei Chachamim, a person forges and clarifies and identifies what is the proper way of doing things. It's called Musar. And the more you have of it, the more you learn Torah HaNefesh, the more you learn Musar, the more you learn Torah, and the more your Da'at becomes Da'at Torah, and you can rely on it to start comparing your own behavior or instinctive behavior to your Da'at.
And that's the Shvil Hazav, the golden path, right?
Yes, and that's what he says. And then the more you question yourself, the more you compare your instinct to your da'at, and the more you aim towards the shvil hazah, to the golden path, toward the balance, to the middle, and the more you train yourself instinctively to react like that, to the point where once you fully instinctively react the same way your da'at would dictate the way to react, you are, the more you are healed and healthy.
And becomes more natural.
Right. Once it becomes natural, you're healthy.
Uh-huh.
You did the tikkun of the midah. That's tikkun amidot. And how can we rephrase tikkun amidot? Now you brought Mashiach to that midah. You freed yourself from the influence of that midah on you. It's no longer that trait that influencing you. It's you that influence that trait. You are now existing, living through that. You as a person are living through that trait. It's
the trait's not controlling you. You're controlling the trait now.
You identified it. That's it. You influenced it. That it's you now. That trait is you.
Very interesting.
No, B'ezrat Hashem. We're going to stop here. Because then it gets into the practical aspect of things and how to start implementing the actual work, right? The medication, the
remedy,
the therapy. Then it goes into practical therapy.
Okay, exciting.
So, Be'ezrat Hashem.
Okay, Tzaddik.
Thank you.